Hello, my name is Kathy Jameson, the Proposition Lady, and today I'm going to talk about Proposition 47, which voters passed in 2014. Prior to the passage of Prop 47, if a person stole less than $400 worth of goods, the crime was classified as a misdemeanor rather than a felony. Prop 47 raised the threshold for felony property crime from $400 to $950, keeping more small-time thieves out of prison. According to some of my neighbors on Nextdoor, Prop 47 unleashed a wave of property crime that is still having an impact 9 years after its passage. Is that true? And if so, why did we do it? Let's go back in time. In the 1980s, the United States experienced a crime wave that remains the highest in our country's history. In response to these high crime rates, legislators across the United States wrote laws that were designed to keep convicted felons behind bars for as long as possible. This practice is known as mass incarceration, and the U.S. got really good at it in the 90s. Stiff penalties were imposed not just on those who committed violent crimes, but also on drug users, with mandatory minimum sentencing that prevented judges from applying leniency or sentencing people based on their individual situations. California was no exception. Our 1994 three strikes law required double sentencing for any felony if the subject had a prior violent or serious felony on their record, and a mandatory 25 years to life sentence if the subject had two prior convictions, even if their third strike was not a violent or serious felony. This law was largely responsible for a nearly 900% increase in California's prison population over the next 30 years. California's prisons did not have the capacity to support this level of incarceration. By 2011, a system that was designed to hold 85,000 inmates was home to 156,000. A lawsuit called Brown v. Plata went all the way to the Supreme Court, which ruled that California must reduce its prison population due to violation of the U.S. Constitution's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. California's prison population has fallen dramatically since then and was down to around 96,000 inmates in January of 2023. This was accomplished with a number of measures, some more controversial than others. It started in 2011 with Assembly Bill 109, a sprawling piece of legislation known as prison realignment. The main point of AB 109 was to allow people convicted of less serious felonies to serve their time in local county jails rather than state prisons, shifting inmates away from the more crowded state facilities. Then in 2012, voters passed Proposition 36, which revised our three strikes law to prohibit life sentencing if the third strike was not a violent or serious felony. It also allowed those who had been sentenced under the original version of the 1994 law to seek resentencing. Prop 47 was passed in 2014. And as you know, it raised the threshold for felony property crime from $400 to $950. It also required a misdemeanor instead of a felony sentence for drug possession offenses. Prop 47 takes the money we save in court and prison expenses and applies that toward mental health and drug treatment programs, K-12 schools, and crime victims. Prop 47 still allows for felony convictions for the offenses listed if the person convicted has a history of certain violent crimes. But the idea behind it is a focus on prevention and treatment rather than mass incarceration. Then there was Prop 57 in 2016, which allowed people serving extended three-strike sentences to be eligible for parole instead of serving out a life sentence for a nonviolent crime. Also in 2016, Californians passed Prop 64, which legalized recreational marijuana use and prompted some district attorneys to apply it retroactively, resentencing or dismissing thousands of marijuana convictions. Then in 2020, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation released thousands of nonviolent offenders early to slow the spread of COVID-19. Despite all these aggressive measures, the one I hear most about is Prop 47. It's hard to escape dramatic headlines of large shoplifting operations, particularly in San Francisco and Los Angeles. If Prop 47 is to blame, I would expect the effect to be limited to California, but when I checked YouTube, I saw flash mob thieves in cities like Manhattan, Portland, and Denver, as well as smaller cities in Florida, Missouri, and even Connecticut. If Prop 47 is to blame for increased property theft, another thing I would expect to see is thieves limiting the value of stolen goods to the $950 threshold. Yet many of the complaints about Prop 47 cite more valuable merchandise, like stolen cars and Apple products. I can understand why people are frustrated. Because thieves tend to steal an entire shelf's worth of items, many retail stores have their merchandise locked up in cabinets. Law enforcement officials have noted that many of the items targeted by thieves end up as discount goods online as part of an organized effort for illegal resale of stolen goods, which is why California lawmakers passed Assembly Bill 1065 in 2019, creating a regional property crimes task force coordinated by the California Highway Patrol and the Department of Justice. In addition, the City of Los Angeles recently created its own task force to address this issue. Looking nationally, Congress passed a bill called the Inform Act, which just took effect and requires online marketplaces to gather information about high-volume third-party sellers. Whether or not these efforts are successful, it's simply untrue to say that lawmakers and law enforcement officials are ignoring the problem. One thing that's clear is that there is no easy answer. Recent next-door posts make it sound like we can solve the property crime issue by reversing Prop 47 or returning to the era of mass incarceration. But it's just not that simple. Mass incarceration has a lot of issues. To begin with, it's worth noting that other countries are able to keep crime rates low without locking up a large proportion of their citizens. Mass incarceration also illuminates the inequality within our criminal justice system. Black Americans make up 14% of the general population, but 33% of the prison population. In addition, many of our prisons are run as private businesses that profit by using inmates for cheap labor and charging exorbitant fees for things like phone calls or toiletries. Lastly, our system is designed to make it very difficult for ex-convicts to find work or housing once they're released, steering people back to the criminal behavior that got them in trouble in the first place. These are some of the reasons why California is rethinking mass incarceration and trying to focus more on education and rehabilitation. Property theft is a nationwide issue with many contributing factors: income inequality, inflation, the normalization of extreme behavior, and the difficulty of catching shoplifters who wear masks and other clothing to conceal their identity. We have been trained by social media algorithms and political pundits to reduce complex issues to inflammatory pronouncements. Anger and outrage generate a lot of income for social media companies and TV news networks. Ranting against Prop 47 may feel good, but it won't fix the complicated issue of property crime in California. I'm Kathy Jameson, the Proposition Lady, and I appreciate you being here with me today. See you soon, California voters. Bye now.